Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Metzler, one of the programmers here at SF.Fest. Glad to have you here. As you might have heard, we've been, for the last 23 years, we've been screening some of the most interesting, irreverent, and just cool documentaries from around the world and bringing them to the Bay Area. And our closing night film, you just had a chance to see 23 Mile, and we're lucky enough to have director Mitch McCabe here. Welcome, Mitch.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
So, maybe a good place to start is like, what was the kind of catalyst for the kind of idea for the film, and that you knew you wanted to go down this rabbit hole?
Well, so believe it or not, this is kind of the more long-winded answer I have to any question because it kind of came about in a weird way. I mean, I've been sort of a one camera or working as like a, you know, filmmaker, one person band kind of a thing since I started in the 90s. Um, documenting has always kind of sort of been a part of my creative and social practice, although less so now. Something happened in the pandemic where I don't take any pictures of any social interactions or parties. I just forget. I'm like so in the moment, just like the whole Instagram thing kind of went away. But anyway, there's that. I'm obviously from Michigan, but in 2018, I started making a project called Civil War Surveillance Poems, and that's sort of a seven-part feature film, um, more in the experimental documentary terrain, using footage I've been shooting since the 90s of shooting all over the country. Um, Obviously, I do quite a few road trips. Um, but the spine of the film is really from found sound, specifically call-in radio and radio shows that I've become rather sort of, I don't know about obsessed with, but maybe I'm just endlessly, fascinated, as you can even see from this film. Um, and that film, as the title kind of alludes to, is about sort of contemplating, you know. It sort of zigzags across time between a questionable future about impending civil war, and yes, I've been tracking the Garland film for like 2 years, excitedly. Like it's experimental, guys. It's not a $50 million film. So anyway, the last chapter of that was always going to be based on conservative on interviews I'd done with conservative and liberal militia, using actors. But then 2020 happened. I was like, you can't deal with actors on a low budget. I can barely handle a sound person, in COVID restrictions. Um, in fact, I did never had a sound person on the film. So I just realized with everything that started kind of happening in 2020, I'm like, let's just go home. We're the hot, like the birthplace of American militia, or one of the birthplaces anyway, because there was a lot of, the anti-lockdown protests and whatnot. So I just started filming, and I always thought it was just going to be this small section of the film, and it was never its own feature. But I've been really recommended that maybe I should entertain that idea, and I was like, no, 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 it'll work. And finally, like March 2023, this assistant editor, he and I just looked at each other. He was like, it's kind of an Altman film, just Michigan in 2020. I was like, that's all you need to say. So, but there were very like impact oriented reasons why I felt like it needed to be its own film. Because if I only chose 15 minutes, then I might never be able to sort of illustrate to a viewer that, hey, we had a Miami 2000 moment happen here. Our election did not end, and it was barely ended by Christmas, right? People in New York City were like, oh, good, the election is over by November 7th. No, it was going, and protest groups had a role to play in that, right? Protecting the vote after November 3rd or 7th or whatever it was. 3rd, sorry, yeah, because there are these weird moments there. So has only been its own film for a little while, less than a year before it premiered.
Well, and I guess that what was your kind of the aesthetic approach that you decided to take with the film? I mean, was it was it affected based on the kind of larger series that you were first shooting it for, the pandemic, or what was your kind of vision as the director? How did that kind of evolve over the course of filming, based on just the nature of the world at the time?
Sure. I mean, I think that, you know, luckily I can shoot and edit, so I can always bring my budget way down. Suffer what I will. Um, so there's that level of empowerment, right? And I think I do in times that I'm really sort of trying to figure something out that's really complicated to me or that I don't see represented like in my social and documentary circles, or echo chambers rather. Obviously like between various echo chambers, um, 1 foot out, 1 foot not, since I, live in Michigan half the time. Um, but I lost track of my thought. What was the question?
Aesthetic approach. How much of the aesthetic
Aesthetic
approach
approach, right.
was based on the earlier film or the circumstances of life at the moment, or did it evolve based on the story you discovered you wanted to follow?
Well, so I knew that, like, for instance, I mean, within aesthetic approach, I'm also, I guess, folding in structure, right? Like, I was never going to have a political figure, lot, you know what I mean? Like lighting and, them to be this kind of voice guiding us through. That was going to really be structured by the calendar and the people I found.
Mhm.
But, the material came first and informed me of what kind of film it was going to be, Like, I think
Okay.
you can make almost any film, right? Um, but you just have different confines, right? You have to play within different rules. Um, and the more I thought about it, it's like I am interacting with these people, and this is the discussion, and this is kind of a political diary. It's not my diary. I'm not telling you how I feel, right? But I think you can glean, right? It's there. So, and I just personally love, um, it's kind of curious to me that like narrative film can be more playful and almost uh, innovative and experimenting, whereas we're like, no, don't use the zoom lens. Like, when did that happen? Like documentary originated the damn zoom lens. Um, so maybe not, but you know what I'm saying. Um, so I kind of love, including that, and then that these just like slightly more, sort of hand of the filmmaker and like presence that we don't get to maybe see as often in our endless, effort to sort of clean up and cover up our like tracks and fissures. So
And if you don't mind, what was the kind of um the sound design process, I guess? Like, I mean, is it all kind of natural sound, or are you kind of like adding sounds from other places based on some of the influence of your other work? Or yeah,
mhm,
what was the kind of what did the role did audio play in creating
mhm.
a layer of the film?
So the audio, in terms of the radio, really does give the sort of like the news arc structure to the year. Um, I mean, to the film, in terms of like, placing you insert. Okay, now the Whitmer plot was just unraveled, and there was a raid, or now there's this lawsuit trying to contest the vote. Oh, there were fake electors, right? So there's that thing that the sound is doing. But in terms of sort of the artistic approach to the sound design, I mean, Jeremiah Moore did an amazing job. He was exactly who I should have collaborated with. And people were actually coming up to me at the party going, how'd you get such great sound? I'm like, I didn't. Like, I did not. Um, but I did have a great like German Schoeps microphone that I bought like 20 years ago. It's the best investment I've ever made. But the only investment I've ever made. And so when you pan, you're not losing your radius. You don't if you move to talk to somebody, right? You could still catch somebody. And then I did have some wireless mics on me, but I'm mostly filming completely alone. On election day, I had a PA. There was one other time I had a PA with me that was just spotting me as I walked backwards for 2 miles with a protest, with a 7200. My arm like couldn't move. Um, so he's he comes at that with a really specific approach that I don't feel that I can speak to, right? Like it's not like he just went up at freesound.org. Like he was really specific about what sounds he used, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and I think our biggest move that was still happening like in January and February, um, as we're trying to get ready for True False, was the decision that at a certain point I was like, I know that we can't hear this anymore. We
Mm.
can't hear like that guy who's in the megaphone, like let's bring it way down. And I want that to be the first moment where we really have anything that could be called score. It's barely score, but it's like that kind of blowing glass sound because we can't hear it anymore. And it's not about that. And it's really, that's the scariest part of the film is the last 10 minutes, right? It's we hear from the people for an hour who most of whom don't feel represented by any side, and it's more than two sides, right? It's just we only have two parties. And then once the election happens, it's a football game, you know, and it's scary. So those were some of the things that some of the ideas that we worked through with it.
And have some of
Yeah,
the
thank
folks
you. It's
in
great.
the film had a chance to see it, and what's the kind of reaction been to that?
Yeah, it's been really positive. I mean, I obviously like how I normally do things is I do shoot at least with a PA who's, we're papering people, as it were, getting the waiver and whatnot. However, it's the film is at public events the entire time. We're on public
Yeah.
property almost the entire time, except there's one interview and that got a waiver, and I had already been filming him. Um, but I have been slowly showing people the film since like February, or even no, in the fall. I even before I showed some people, um, but everybody that I do film, I got verbal release. I mean, if somebody wants filmed, it's like this works beautifully. I'm not
Right.
gonna like who no one needs that. No one needs that in their life to like film somebody that doesn't want to be filmed. Um, but yeah, it's been overwhelmingly positive. I mean, we not just overwhelmingly, nobody has expressed anything otherwise to me. Um,
Well,
there's
you just recently
still
had a chance to screening in Michigan, right?
yes, and there were several people from the film who were in it. Hello, I just said the same thing. Who came to that screening? In fact, one of whom, Fred, who is the Biden sign guy, whose house was covered by Biden signs. Um, he was up on at the part of the panel with us, and he has a really interesting big change of heart since 2020. Um, as a Arab American, he's
Hmm.
furious about, or just you don't. Um, he's pretty furious about the war, and so he spoke out about that and his change, and got a round of applause from the audience. So you know, that was a really nice panel to have this, like, three or four different sort of voices and perspectives and stakeholders weigh in.
Well, well, as we wrap up, I mean, I think that the thing that's really great about the film is it's this sort of film that is just a really cool, art and creative story to be told. But I think, over dinner or drinks afterwards, it's the thing where it's a kind of catalyst for great conversation. And so I always try to remind our audiences that we're lucky enough that filmmakers like you share their films early in their life cycle. And the idea is if we like it, we're going to go talk about it,
Hmm.
whether it be at the
Hmm.
backyard barbecue or on social media. So, what are ways that folks can kind of continue to follow your work and also spread the word about the film out there online?
Sure. The website for the film is 23milefilm.com. And so we have a, contact and newsletter sign up for to follow news about the film. So after San Francisco Doc Festival, we have Cinetopia in Ann Arbor, but we have some other things kind of ramping up. So with distribution talks starting to happen. Um, but yeah, obviously it's very early in the life of the film, just the last, couple months, and we're expecting and planning and strategizing for um, a pretty busy like August onwards as people finally come to accept the fact that we're going to have to have an election. But yeah, there's one other, can I talk about one more thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is often the question about platforming. And I think the term has, it's almost like this pebble that's gone down a hill and just collected everything in its wake. And I think we forget that, you know, first of all, these are normal people. These are not people with, you know, power per se. What some of them do have weapons, but you know, a lot of the conversations in the film, like the one at the, you know, rally between LGBTQ, Boogaloo, and Black Guns Matter was really, I think the purpose of why they had that demonstration was to open the conversation for allyship. Because remember, this is 2020. We did not know how things were going to go. Things seemed really scary on every front. I mean, they're probably going to seem pretty scary soon, right? And so it was actually some of those discussions were real. I wasn't directing those. It was people trying to find sort of common ground. And I think, you know, like I said before, the sort of perception of two sides is not really what people particularly want because they don't feel represented in that. But I think also, you know, to advocate for, you know, what we want or our policies or like, you know, for climate to address climate change, we have to figure out how, you know, the other side, what their strategy is, right? You know, a football coach is never going to like not study the other team. And so it's part of sort of what I'm doing in my recent filmmaking. Just to, I get the question a lot, and it was very well considered in the purpose of a lot of the films I'm making right now. So.
Very cool. Well, the folks check out 23milefilm.com. Let people know that there's this kind of great film making the rounds out over the years. And we'll look forward to seeing the next film too, Mitch.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Okay.
And